Oh, burped. Just what everyone wants. Just what everyone wants. Hello.
Oh, that went. Hey, it's the Graveyard Girls. Welcome to today's episode. Amelia's going first today. What's your case?
Okay, so it's a crime. There's a crime in it, but we're also touching on a little bit of witchcraft.
Oh, so it's like kind of like my other one from the other week.
Yeah, and there's witch trials kind of involved in it. And this definitely opens up. This is something I want to go and look at when we go on to do Girls on Tour.
Yep.
Because there is monuments linked to this. So this would be a brilliant one. I was torn with this. I nearly held it back until we were ready to do Girls on Tour so that I could do this case, and then we could do like a follow-up on a little like Girls on Tour one, and then link in Instagram and TikTok with it.
Yep.
But I also really want to do the case now, so I'm going to do it now, and we will do, for our little side series of Girls on Tour, we can go and touch up on this and obviously make references to this case. Now, it is solved, technically, this case, because of the women that are accused of it. However, I'm throwing in there that someone else could have possibly actually done the murders rather than these women that were accused of it.
Interesting.
It's mainly because of reports that I read. It goes back to, this is another one that I got from the book that I mentioned last week, The Bad Women in History.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was a whole section on it on pirates, witches, which is where this comes into.
See, I told you this book is a good idea.
It is a good idea.
Oh, good gift, sorry.
And it makes reference to a man. And I only looked at it because I recognised this guy's name. I was thinking, why do I know this guy's name? So I Googled him. And then I found links about him linking to the king at the time, which was King James I. And there was some conspiracy around him. And then I found more information on him.
I think I know a little bit of what you're on about.
Yeah. And then it kind of weirdly, then it linked me back. Obviously, you get stuck down a bit of a rabbit hole. Someone made a suggestion that linked into about someone that he knew that had died, and then it linked me back to this case. So I was like, okay, I'm throwing this guy in here as a possible other suspect in the case.
Okay.
So I'm
intrigued.
Yeah, like I said, it's a mixture between the witch trials, the death of the people who've died, and the fact that even though the case was solved...
You say King James?
Yeah, so the case is basically, it's a mixture of witchcraft and witch trials in which these women are accused of the crime and obviously die as a result of it. But it's also this side bit of the guy who I think was more than likely the guy who did it. Or there's a strong possibility to suggest he did actually do it. So it's a solved case, but I'm throwing it in there because this guy he's aroused enough suspicion for me that I feel...
Okay, I want you to get into the story now because I don't know what you're on about. I feel like I do know what you're on about, but there's a bit, because you just keep hinting, I'm like, well, what is it then?
Okay, so I'll get started.
Tell me.
Right, so this is the case of the witches of Beaver and the deaths of Henry and Francis Manners. Now, this is where it gets confusing depending on where you live on. This makes references to Beaver Castle, which is what we call it in Leicester. But a lot of people will call it Belvoir. But we're from Leicester, so we're calling it Beaver.
Belvoir just sounds too fancy.
Yeah. So
from our voices, you can probably tell we're not that fancy.
Yeah, no,
Belvoir Castle. I think we drove by that when we got lost once.
Oh, yeah, we might have done actually.
You're
really throwing me out.
When we came back from holiday.
Oh yeah,
we got lost.
Yeah,
and we got went a little bit. We got lost. I didn't think we were going to get home.
It's fine. Magical mystery tour, Natasha.
It took us down a weird driveway that took us to a small village that I thought we might get murdered in. My phone was just like, turn around, turn around, turn around. I don't know where to go.
It's fine. We made it home. We've lived to tell the tale.
Did we? That's why life's been shit since, because we
like
died.
We've been cursed?
No, we died.
Oh.
Maybe we never made it home. We're now with ghosts.
Yeah, but then how are people going to pick us up on the audio to listen to the podcast?
Because we're the Graveyard Girls.
Okay.
We're
dead inside. Our shells still exist.
Definitely dead inside. Oh, yeah, like you said, we were cursed the moment we entered that weird town.
Yeah. I think that's what's happened. I'll go with that. I'll roll with that. It explains everything else, doesn't it, if we were cursed? Which actually coincidentally brings me back into this case.
Little segue.
Right, so this is going all the way back to 1565. There was a lady born, her name is Joan Flowers.
That sounds familiar.
Okay, well obviously it's kind of local history, so you might have picked it up. I hadn't, to be honest. I hadn't heard of this lady. Obviously I know about the witch trials and the stuff that's gone on a little bit in the local area, but I don't know specifically a reference to her. This lady Joan, would then go on to mother 2 daughters. Their names are Margaret and Philippa Flower.
Yeah.
All 3 of these ladies, obviously as they grow up, all 3 of these ladies would go on to work as herbal healers.
Yeah.
They'd come from a poor local family, and then they would later go on to accept work as servants with the 6th Earl and Countess of Rutland at Beaver Castle near Grantham in Lincolnshire.
I think Tom gave me a book, and this is why I know it, because I think I was writing about it before we even started the podcast. So like a year or 2 ago. So I think this is where it is. The book's over there. It's history to do with Leicestershire.
Oh, okay. So yeah, they'll have definitely cropped up in that.
I think that's why I know it.
Because it's quite a prominent witch trial for the area.
Yeah.
So now by the time that they're working for them, the upcoming staff were needed for an upcoming visit by King James I. But the sisters Margaret and Philippa were quite unpopular with the staff, and along with their mother, they were accused of a theft. All 3 were dismissed, and only Joan was given payment of severance, which amounted to 40 shillings, a pillow and a mattress of wool. So basically, I'm guessing they mainly suspected the girls, but didn't want any of them working there, so they still gave Joan a bit of a payment as like, right, okay, you can go.
A pillow.
Yeah, a pillow.
A pillow and a mattress.
Yeah. So I'm guessing they would have had nowhere else to live. You know, when they went to work there, they've lived in servants' quarters. So rather than just sort of casting Joan out, I feel like they more suspected her daughters of the crime, but they obviously still didn't want her there. So they basically gave her a bit of money, a pillow and a mattress. So
pillow.
And it's like, all right, off you go. We don't want you anymore. So soon after the Flowers were dismissed, the Earl and Countess fell ill and were said to suffer from convulsions.
Yeah.
The eldest son, Henry, died and was buried on September the 26th, 1613. A daughter, Catherine, and younger son, Francis, would also become ill. The younger son didn't die until a few years later, but the family still attributed the Flowers, claiming a curse had been placed.
Yep, I'm nodding
going
because
to get back to that bit in a minute. Right.
You reading it out loud is bringing me back the memories, but I don't remember it before you're telling me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the 3 Flowers ladies, which is what we're going to refer them as, would not actually be accused of the illness and death straight away. 3 years had passed from Henry's death, and then on the 16th of July 1616, 9 women in the area were hanged as witches in Bottisford, so really not far from us, which is also in Leicestershire, and that was for having bewitched a young boy, and in charges similar to those in the Flowers cases, they were said to have kept cats as familiars.
Yep.
This is relevant to Joan more specifically, as the Countess would later claim that Joan Flower was an atheist who had boasted of her affinity with familiars, including her cat Rutterkin.
Oh,
yeah,
Rutterkin.
And it's quite a cute name, isn't it? It wasn't until the death of the second son, Francis, in 1618, so that's a whole 5 years after Henry's death, that the 3 Flowers ladies would be arrested. They were arrested near to Christmas time in 1618. The 3 were taken to Lincoln Jail, where they were questioned. I quite like this next bit coming up.
I think I know where it's going.
Yeah. Joan was known for being unkempt and foul-mouthed, and so she decided she was going to prove her innocence by eating bread not blessed by the Eucharist. The theory at the time was that if she choked on it, then she was guilty of casting a spell over her family. Unfortunately, she did actually choke to death. So, at the time when witch things were already in the air, she was now most definitely a witch, according to everyone else, because she choked on the bread she was so adamant she was not going to choke on. I do feel like there's a possibility someone put something in the bread, forcing her to choke.
Or she just had a really dry mouth, and then you have dry bread.
Yeah, quite possibly. But I feel like someone wanted to she was like, I don't know, almost a bit cocky about it. So someone's like, yeah, we're going to
Yeah,
put
I'm
a
not gonna
nail
buy
or
it.
something
Yeah.
in this bread. So she does actually choke to death.
That's the problem with the history. If you're a woman and you've got moles, you're a witch. If
a big
you're
nose.
if you've got a big nose, if you're too beautiful, if you're too ugly, if you're too rich, or if you're too poor,
Got a
you're
cat.
a witch. You've got a cat. You've got a dog. It's just, you can't win.
Yeah, I think back then we'd have definitely been killed for being witches.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I don't think we stand. To be honest, there's a lot of things in history I don't think we would have stood much of a chance. I think we've been murdered several times.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
Oh.
Obviously, unfortunately, Joan dies. Now, her daughters were then subject to 5 weeks of questioning, sleep deprivation, and torture until they confessed.
Exactly, but you're going to confess because you've had
Been
through
tortured.
all that. Yeah.
The sisters would pass the blame onto their now dead mother. They would claim that their mother had cast a spell by dripping Henry's glove into boiling water, then rubbing it against Rutterkin, the cat, Rutterkin's back before pricking it and burying it. This was accompanied by incantations to ensure that Henry and the glove would disintegrate simultaneously. Obviously, he didn't disintegrate. Obviously, there was little evidence to support the accusations of witchcraft against the sisters, but they were generally regarded locally as obnoxious and of low morals, which in those days was enough.
You're a witch, yeah.
Yeah. Uneducated and unable to defend themselves, they were tried, found guilty, and hung at Lincoln in March 1619. They were hanged along with 3 other women who the sisters had incriminated along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm going to touch on a little bit of history of the other women that were hung alongside this. And this is where, for me, it's your classic witch trials. They're going off on nothing, although the girls really didn't help themselves. The Flower sisters claimed that there was obviously 3 other women. Anne Baker from Bottisford, Joan Wilmot from Goadby, and Ellen Green from Stavern.
Mm-hmm.
They claimed that they'd helped them, and these 3 women were then arrested and taken for examinations, which is, I suppose it's like questioning as well, but I think they also brought out doctors to examine them for being witches.
I think there's supposed to be a mark. When I was looking into, like, it was years ago. There's like, I know it's like if you have a mole, you're a witch. And
Yeah.
it's
So
like,
they're looking for certain things.
Yeah. It's like, who doesn't have moles? I'm covered in them.
Yeah, I have quite a few.
So it's like, you and I would be.
Yeah, we're dead already.
Yeah.
During these examinations, it revealed that they too had visions and consorted with familiar spirits.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where I like for Wilmot. I feel like she might be describing something else, and you'll know what I mean when I say this. It tickled me when I read it.
Okay.
But this was enough for her. This was enough for her to be suggested that she was a witch, but I feel like she might be describing another act altogether.
Okay.
Okay, so she said
Oh, I know what you're on.
that her familiar was called Pretty
Yeah.
and had been blown into her mouth by her former master in the form of a fairy. It would later reappear in the form of a woman who asked her to give her her soul. Wilmot testified more as a cunning woman than a witch and insisted that Pretty only helped her to inquire about the health of people she attempted to heal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not convinced something went in her mouth and came back as a person. I mean, something might well have gone in her mouth as a result of her master.
Yes.
But yeah,
It
it's
was
an
a
interesting.
fairy, Amelia.
Yeah,
It was a
it's an
fairy.
interesting story. But I'm not quite sure how old she was, so I'm wondering if she was a bit younger because she maybe have been traumatised by a certain act
Oh.
and
no.
covered it up as a story.
Oh.
Yeah, but she was so confident
Yeah.
in the way she said it
Yeah.
that it made her appear a little bit delusional.
Well, why did you have to make it?
No, but for me, as soon as I
Child.
no, but do you know what I mean? Like the way
It makes sense.
at first it gave me a giggle.
Yeah.
Like when I thought that is not what you're describing. And then I was sort of thinking, I wonder
I'm just
how
gonna
old
put
she
this.
is.
I'm just gonna put this fairy in your mouth.
But do you know what I mean?
Of course
When-
I know what you mean.
No, but when you think about it,
Yeah.
you think about the witch trials and what they're accused of.
Yeah.
I find it quite unlikely that a fairy then reappeared.
I mean, she spat it back out.
yeah, she didn't swallow it.
You're saying fairy, not furry.
Fairy, yeah,
Okay.
fairy. With wings. Not hairy. Green then claimed that she'd had accompanied Willamot into a wood where she said Willamot had conjured up 2 spirits in the form of a kitten and a mole. Very interesting. A mole as in an animal.
Yeah, I know.
Which had then climbed up onto her shoulders and sucked on her ears. Yeah.
I thought you was going to go somewhere else then. Oh.
Yeah, sorry, I put your mind in the gutter now, sorry. Green then claimed that she sent these familiars to kill a man and a woman with who she said she had argued.
Wait. Why would you just stand there and watch your friend's ears be sucked? Wouldn't you be like,
yeah, what's going on?
Yeah, I
But
don't
they're
want to
supposed
witness.
to be witches, according to the Times, so apparently that's normal practice.
So like a cat and a mole sucking.
Yeah. It's a strange combination of animals, I thought, as well.
Also, don't moles have that little
Yeah.
that weird mouth?
Oh, that's a starfish mole.
Okay.
It is a type of mole, but
Okay.
it's your average ones. No, they just got little like pointy noses. They're quite cute, actually.
Because I was thinking of something else. Because if that little star bit is on your...
Okay, yeah, there is a type of mole like that. Yeah.
Might feel quite nice.
Yeah, so she sent these familiars to kill a man and a woman with who she'd argued, and both died within a fortnight. So they're claiming that that man and woman were the Earl and the Countess.
Okay.
But not her, who the other woman had argued with.
Yep.
And that's... So she's kind of not implicating herself. She was saying, I didn't realise who it was. I just thought it was an average person that we argued with. The familiars were sent. But she also implicates herself in it, weirdly.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, the sisters, has she been tortured a bit? So she's kind of half confessed.
Yeah.
That then takes us to the last woman who confessed to possessing a familiar in the form of a white dog, but most of her testimony concerned the visions that she'd witnessed. So it's kind of like she didn't physically do anything, but because she claimed to have visions and was linked with these other women, she kind of just got lumped in with them.
Bit unfair. Well,
Yeah.
the whole witch trial and everything is
so
unfair.
much of it was just so wrong. They
Of course it
very
was.
clearly weren't witches. They were just murdered and tortured in a brutal way, based on very little evidence. So then obviously once these testimonies had gone forward, the Earl and the Countess remained so convinced that their sons had been killed by the effects of witchcraft that they actually had it inscribed on their monument at Bottisford Church. So this is what I want to go and have a little look at.
Bottisford, how far away? Not far.
No, a few matter of miles from here.
Yeah, you can go have a little day trip.
Yeah. So I thought that'd be a nice one to do. Go and have a little look at that monument.
Yeah.
And then obviously the whole area's got very good links with witch trials, but I like that it tied in with this case.
Yeah.
Because obviously this will be the graves of that family. So then this is bringing it back a little bit more into present day. Because in 2013, a historian called Tracy Borman suggested that the Flowers women may have been framed by a favourite of King James I. And this is where my suspect comes in. So obviously these women were obviously accused of it, and that was the end of the case as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
It's more than possible that these women had something to do with the death in some way. They could have poisoned food. I think they could have killed them, but not as a form of witchcraft. But also, why would they kill the family? The only way that you could bring it in without the witchcraft element was that they were pissed off that they'd lost their job.
Yeah, I just think it was a coincidence that, unfortunately, women at the time, it's easy to accuse someone of witchcraft rather than providing evidence.
And that's it. And at the time, like, okay, they could have technically poisoned them and the first son died, but then why would they go back years later and kill the second son? But obviously that's where the witchcraft comes in, and they claimed it was a curse. But yes, I'm not, even though they were obviously killed I'm not convinced they actually did it. So then that opened up to, for me, then that means the case isn't solved. So who is responsible for it? Now, this is where a man for me picked up, because there was a Leicestershire man called George Villiers. And I was like, I know the name Villiers. Like, I was thinking, where can I think that up? And I basically, when I finished school, I went to Brooksby College, and the canteen in there is Villiers. And it turns out that this guy would have actually been brought up, he was born in Brooksby. So there's a strong possibility that the reason the buildings within Brooksby College were named that is because it's named after people in the area. Because as soon as I read it, I was like, I know that name. And I couldn't understand why. So then I kept delving in and looking into, and that's when I discovered this guy. So George Villiers, he was then made the Duke of Buckingham in 1623. The theory is that Villiers had plans to marry Rutland's the Rutland's daughter, so, you know, the Earl and the Countess,
Yeah.
their daughter Catherine, obviously she survived, she was the only one out of the brothers, and that with her two brothers dead, he would then inherit the title.
Okay,
because
yeah.
she's obviously a woman,
Yep.
so she doesn't carry it on. The argument is that he, referring to Villiers, had them poisoned, then framed Joan Flower and her two daughters as witches to create a smokescreen to cover up his own guilt.
That's perfect.
After the execution of the Flower sisters, Villiers went on to marry Catherine on the 16th of May, 1620. So then, just to give you a bit more background on Villiers, he was born on the 28th of August, 1592, at Brooksby in Leicestershire, and he died on the 23rd of August, 1628, aged 35, and he died because he was assassinated.
Oh.
He's a very interesting character, and he rubs a lot of people up the wrong way. Which
He's
again,
lived a life.
yes.
Yes.
So initially, and this is the big one for the time, was this George Villiers was actually accused of being one of the lovers of James I.
Yes, I thought... I'm sure it was on another podcast, Noble Blood, I'm sure. She touched on... It's got to be King James. It might not be. I'm assuming it was an English or a Scottish king. He's rumoured to be gay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is very cool. Obviously, for that time, that is definitely a big no-no. Not that it didn't happen. It was covered up and was not allowed to be seen in public eye.
Mm-hmm.
So there was obviously a lot of speculation over whether their relationship was sexual. King James's nickname for Villiers was Steenie, which is after Saint Stephen, who was said to have had the face of an angel.
Oh, that's kind of sweet.
Yeah. So speaking to the Privy Council in 1617, James tried to clarify the situation, and he did this he obviously made a bit of a speech, and this was recorded by, I guess, it's not going to be a typewriter at the time.
I got jester in my head. It's not a jester.
No, he's providing entertainment, supposedly. It's...
Council? No.
Yeah, it kind of is like a note taker,
Yeah.
so whoever would have noted this down. So basically in this he says, "You may be sure that I love the Earl of Buckingham more than anyone else, and more than you who are assembled here. I wish to speak on my own behalf, and not to have it thought to be a defect. For Jesus Christ did the same, and therefore I cannot be blamed. Christ had John, and I have George."
Oh.
Yeah, I thought you might like that.
Yeah.
It's a little bit sweet.
Yeah, you know I'm a sucker for sweet sentimentals.
And that was it. So then I've now then looked into some other history books, and there was a historian called David Bergeron, and he claimed that George Villiers was James's last and greatest lover. And he...
that might explain why he was assassinated as well, if he's King James's lover.
That's what I'm getting onto. So, and it was said that they... they threw like backwards and forwards lots of flowery letters. That's how it was labelled at the time.
Yeah.
That followed, it was called flowery for the 17th century stars of masculinity. Other scholars say there was no sexual relationship between the pair, more that the king's enemies didn't, and that even the king's enemies didn't accuse him. So basically, they were saying that's something that the enemies could have thrown up.
But like you said,
But they
different
didn't.
time, we can't judge history.
It's like I say, it's very different for
Yeah.
the time, isn't
Yeah.
it? It was completely unacceptable.
No.
But then again, I do understand what they're saying here in terms of it. You would have expected it to be something the enemies would have thrown up, because it's a bit of shit on the other person, if you like.
Yeah.
So some of those scholars are saying by the fact that the enemies didn't use it, that it wasn't true.
But going back to what you said about the masculinity of the time, in my head, they are a little bit more
I imagine them being-
feminine.
but I imagine them, very theatrical.
Yeah.
That's how I imagine them being.
Not being all blokish and...
Yeah, I feel like anyone of noble
Yeah.
status was
They're
theatrical.
allowed... Yeah, they're allowed to be a little bit more...
What we're seeing is
feminine.
today's more masculine would have been more common people that are working
Yeah.
the grounds.
Yeah.
But like I said, those noblemen have, I don't know, the luxury of...
Privacy or
Yeah.
eyes being averted when they are being more, quote, feminine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so at the time they relate it as being, they call it flowery at the time. And then this is where some letters come in.
Yeah, I love letters.
So in a letter from King James to George Villiers in 1623, it ended with this. So I didn't do the whole letter because it's quite a long one, but this is just the end of it. It says, "God bless you, my sweet child and wife."
That's a bit weird.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if he's referring to George's wife, Catherine.
Okay.
this is what I'm imagining. So my sweet child, referring to George because he's younger than him, and wife Catherine.
Okay.
And grants that ye may ever be in comfort to hear your dear father and comfort to your dear father and husband. So I don't know when he references father and husband, more like he's a bit older, so sees him as a father figure, and husband as in, like, obviously they can't admit that they have a sexual relationship, but that's sort of between them.
But he could, going back to him saying wife, yeah, he could be the husband in the situation. He calls him his wife. The addressing, my child and wife.
God bless you, my sweet child, and what? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, because I maybe should have included a bit more of the letter. I felt like he was referring to him, George, as my sweet child, like someone that's younger than me, and your wife, like ending it. So the letter's ending it to George and his wife. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
George then reciprocated the affections by writing back to James, and I've obviously again not included the whole letter, just the bits that I felt were relevant.
Mm-hmm.
I naturally so love your person and adore all your other parts, which are more than ever one man had. I desire only to live in the world for your sake. I will live and die a lover of you. So it's still not. I feel like even though people want these right lessons, it's very personal, isn't it?
Very personal. It's saying you love that person entirely.
Yeah.
You're the only one I want.
But obviously other people dissected that, and when he made reference to adore you and all your other parts, people were suggested that might have referenced his genitals. This is, like a long history. This is
that's
people
what I
really
assumed.
dissect everything, don't they?
But that's what he could have meant, because that's where my head went.
So this is how people have sort of dissected it, and it's been thrown in. Other letters then written by George also support that theory of a more personal relationship, and these included whether you loved me now better than at the time, which I shall never forget at Farham, where the bed's heads could not be found between the master and his dog.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's
I'm gonna
you
need
can't
to
cover that up as something else. But yeah, so the first ones you could say it was just written in a very affectionate way, and that's kind of how they greeted each other at the time. That last one is a little bit more personal, and I don't really think you can cover that up as anything else.
Especially the way you loved me at Farnham, was it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's if that was written between Catherine and James, it'd be a very different story, wouldn't it?
It would.
But yeah.
No, I just love letters. I love letters. The correspondence between two people who clearly spent time to write to one another.
Yeah.
And it's just, you want to keep that.
Well, you think as well, back in that time, there wasn't any other
there's
forms of communication.
There's
it's
no
not
other
like sending
forms.
a person messenger. Can you imagine that's what they had to write letters, because if you had a more personal message, you can't send that. Can you imagine me? You want me to send a message to one of your lovers, you recite it to me and I've got to recite that back to them in the same enthusiastic manner.
Yeah. Or like a telegram so everyone else can see it. I think it's something so personal, and you can keep it, and you can see that this person loved you because they wrote it down.
Yeah.
And it's like you can just go over it, and look over it all the time.
And this is it. But then again, for them, I suppose it's not a demise, because there's nothing wrong with two people being gay. But at the time, it was considered bad. So this is why throughout history, it's then obviously been dissected and turned into something else, because it's like, he was gay. This is bad. That's not allowed. Yeah.
But then he could just very, very love his friend.
Yeah, because people do.
Yeah.
Not obsessed with a friend. They have a very strong relationship with their friend, and very close. Yeah. But yeah, so obviously this stirred up a bit of a thing. So already, at the time, George is already upsetting a few people, let's put it that way. So I'll then move on to George Villiers' assassination.
Yep.
So George was classed as an impotent leader. Parliament had twice attempted to impeach the Duke. The King, James I, had rescued him by dissolving it both times, but public feeling was so inflamed, and he was blamed and seen as a public enemy. Eventually, his physician, Dr. Lamb, popularly supposed to assert what was called a diabolic influence over him. As a result, Dr. Lamb was mobbed in the streets and died as a result. Pamphlets were issued, and one read, "Let Charles and George do what they can. The Duke shall die like Dr. Lamb." So it's like a bit of a rhyme.
Yeah.
Which obviously at the time was very popular in the sort of pamphlets that would have gone out. So then, going to his actual assassination, the Duke was then stabbed to death on the 23rd of August in 1628 at the Greyhound pub in Portsmouth. He was there organising yet another campaign, and according to an eyewitness statements at the time, he lived just long enough to jump up shouting "villain" and making chase after his assailant, but then fell down dead.
Oh.
But I feel like it's a little bit over dramatic. Like
Yeah.
he suddenly sprung back up like "villain" and then dropped to the floor.
Well, you do have a little burst of adrenaline, so it could be possible.
Yeah, it could be possible. He could have still shouted out, but I feel it's maybe more from the floor rather than he sprung back up.
Villain.
Yeah. So they caught the person that assassinated him. That man was John Fenton. He was an army officer who had been wounded in earlier military adventure and believed he'd been passed over for promotion by George. So he's obviously not a fan of George, and George is already stirring a bit of trouble in the public eye. The Duke was so unpopular by this point that John Fenton was widely acclaimed as a hero by the public. So even though he's assassinated the guy, he's seen as a hero.
Yeah, that happens sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. Many described the Duke as effeminate, cowardly and corrupt, and contrasted him to John Fenton, who was held up as an example of manliness, courage and virtue.
Okay.
So going back to the times,
I see it.
they've seen one as a man and one is not. Yeah, it's not masculine at all, George Villiers, or that's how he's perceived in the public.
I know it started off as a witch trial, but now I feel sad for King James.
Yeah,
George.
a little bit.
I'm like,
well, maybe not George, because
okay.
this is where it goes in and why I feel like he's possibly going back to he was the one that framed Joan Flowers and her daughters. So it's also worth noting that Catherine's father had a lot of objections to her marrying George. So then that goes back to his motivation. Obviously, if he was gay, he's not going to love her.
It's a marriage of convenience.
Yeah, and obviously with both her brothers being dead, he stands to inherit a lot. He wouldn't. There's a possibility he could have become a duke through James, but by him marrying Catherine, who obviously her parents are an earl and a countess,
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Yep.
James can then legitimately make him a duke. So has he only gained that status? Obviously James has helped him along the way, but by marrying Catherine and her having no brothers, not only has he secured a better title, he stands to inherit it. So it's very convenient.
It is
for
very
him.
convenient.
And it's difficult because there could have still been a third suspect that we have absolutely no idea about, but there was no references to anyone else in the case of the children dying.
So how did the children die again?
So it was suggested they were poisoned because after Joan and her daughters were sacked...
Are they just not allergic to something?
Well, this is, if you remember, going back to when Joan and her sisters... When Joan and her daughters were sacked, within hours of that happening, the family became... So remember, the Earl and the Countess had convulsions.
Yeah.
Henry had the same, died as a result. Then both Francis and Catherine were poorly, but didn't die at the time. Francis has a completely unrelated death years later.
Yeah, sorry.
But it's seen as a curse.
Yeah.
So at the time, the chances are it could have been anyone else within the household that has poisoned the family. So obviously someone's got a vendetta against them. But at the time of the trial, it's seen as those women were sacked at the time, they did it. However, again, going back to good old George, it's a possibility he wanted a marriage of convenience because he marries Catherine really not very long after the death of the second brother. So was it a case of maybe he tried to... the only thing for that where it does throw something in the air and it kind of ruins the idea of why would he risk killing all the family, like the poisonings, why would he risk killing all of them? Because he risks killing Catherine, which would... Obviously, that means he can't take his title. That's the only thing that throws it back in that would ruin the idea of it being George.
It's an interesting case you're making.
Yeah. So he's the only one for me in terms of records and what was noted at the time, because there's nothing like any of the other people that obviously worked there at the time, none of the other groundsmen. He's the only other person that crops up that has a bit of a suspicious... Not suspicious background, but he would have motives. Yeah. For the rest of the family disappearing.
I'm just a little caught up with their love. That I'm like, I see where you're going. It probably will be, but I'm just where I am. I feel like it could be him, but I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about him and King James.
Yeah, Yeah, like I said, it's kind of two separate cases, but they've weirdly merged into one. And like I said, I only discovered the later one.
Yeah, I get why
when
you
looking into the first bit.
It is suspicious that he is.
Because obviously I didn't believe it was the Joan Flowers and her daughter.
No.
So I needed to find another suspect, but there was literally nothing on anyone in the local area, and the only one I could find any dirt on was obviously George. And it's the only one that's well documented. So there's a strong possibility there's suspect number 3 somewhere, who is the person who actually did it.
The man with the fairy penis. He did it.
But yeah, so I don't...
You didn't even think about him.
I hadn't considered that until now.
Mm.
But yeah, like I said, going back to the time, there's a strong possibility it could have been anyone else within the household, anyone with a slight vendetta, because I'm sure Joan Flowers and her daughters were not the only people that had been pissed off by the Earl and Countess.
I imagine a lot of people were, yeah.
Yeah. So it throws up, but it was getting those suspects together, because I could have quite said, oh, it could be anyone, but I had absolutely no evidence to support that whatsoever. So I've just felt like George was a good possibility to throw out there.
That they loved each other. That's all.
Oh, he's dead now.
I mean... Thanks for that.
Well, he is. He's popped it.
He was murdered.
Yeah, no, assassinated.
Mm.
I mean, to be fair, he does sound like he only got his job because James gave it to him. He wasn't actually a good leader. He could have been an okay person, but he was definitely not a leader.
No.
And I feel like, again, that does heighten the thing of how...
Also, King James let him get away with lots of stuff.
He's defended him several times to the court. So obviously the court were not happy with any of these things.
No.
But has he defended him because he was his lover? Which again goes back to these letters and how that's all come about. And like a bit at the time, it would have made him not popular at all.
Of course it wouldn't.
Within the public eye.
No.
And definitely, he isn't a villain, but it makes him a villain.
Yeah, I see what
for
you
the
mean.
time. Yeah. But no, it's definitely...
Yeah, I think you've provided 2 cases in one, but they do fit.
Yeah, they fit in nicely. He offers him up as a suspect.
Yeah. I mean, he could very well be. But like I said, why risk losing Catherine as well?
That's the only bit that just throw it out. That's a little bit of... Okay, because obviously, like I said, both the parents also had convulsions. I mean, it doesn't matter if the parents and both the brothers die, because she's still around. But how could they... I suppose there's that thing of as well, if everyone else was ill, how do you specifically get it so that everyone else was ill and just not her? Because they've obviously done it for a meal, haven't they, somehow, I'm
so unless
guessing.
she's just not there that day, or he's like, don't eat that.
Yeah, but then again, that's immediately erasing...
I brought you a McDonald's.
I don't think McDonald's has got... What's the equivalent?
Burger King. I'm thinking of Shrek. Shrek, second Shrek. They have a Burger King in medieval times. Medieval... No idea.
Oh, okay.
He brought her a McDonald's.
Okay.
And he poisoned the soup with...
something else. Yeah, but then by him giving her that, he's already erased suspicions about himself, because why did he get her to eat something else? So that's where...
Because he's trying to woo her.
I know, but if he gets everyone ill, then it's definitely Joan, isn't it? Because and her daughters, because if everyone's a bit ill, but luckily for him, Catherine hasn't died, it's a case of like the whole family were targeted and cursed. It really highlights that case of, well, the witches did it.
Yeah. Like I said, it's always convenient when you're blaming a witch. It's just because you don't know what happened, so you're like...
Yeah, it's like a cop-out, if you like.
Exactly. It's always a cop-out.
But yeah, so I thought it was interesting. Definitely worth noting, George, because he's an interesting character.
I'm glad you included the little bit of love notes.
Because I felt like I needed to explain his history for you to understand why I felt he was a possible suspect. And I feel like it quite ties in quite well. So thank you for listening. That's it for today.
In the meantime, keep creeping.
And we'll keep digging.